I'm going to just talk a little bit about my process, I guess, in coming to these issues, and then a little bit about the the course development, and then a few things that I do when it gets hot in the classroom, which it almost always does at some point. I'm going to try to see if I can. Okay, and so a couple of things. First of all, start with. For me, this permeates all of my teaching, and it's all of my scholarship, and that makes it easier. So over time, I have actually created this kind of storehouse of examples and stories and anecdotes and current events and things that I bring in, which really helps. And it wasn't always this way. And in fact, Teresa may remember, at one point, there's a course I'm teaching now that is really fun and I love, and I teach it every fall, and by their mid-semester evaluation feedback, it sounds like it's going well. And the first time I taught it, I was 4 weeks in, and I called Matt Kaplan, who's the director here, in a panic. Like, I'm about to lose this class, and I need help, and I had been teaching for 10 years. So I am a big fan of using resources. He was great, and he recommended Kriska, who's not here anymore, and we did some really terrific work. And it made a huge difference, and it wasn't the first time I called Matt in a panic, because I have said some pretty sometimes not mindful things in class, and it's really helpful to have resources, including people with whom to talk about those moments so that I can get back on the court and keep doing the work that I do. And so some strategies for my course. So my courses are front-loaded, which means that on my course policies, I have language that specifically talks about we are going to have some moments in class. Is it possible to, or I could just kind of mention, so there's, Teresa can explain this in a few minutes, but she put together this wonderful thing for people online who are here, and there's a bunch of handouts in there because we figured that would be a lot easier that I'm going to mention. So one of the things is a handout that I put together that actually quotes from a couple of my course policies. One that is for a course that is on literature and social change, and it's just completely topical. And the other is a first-year writing course, and technically it's not topical. So I just gave you some sample language on there, if that would be useful, and we could talk about it more. I do a first-day inquiry, which actually was Kriska's suggestion, to get them thinking about who they are in the class, and that there are some people who are going to be familiar with these issues and some people who aren't, and that everybody's welcome. And that gets them going. And then typically in classes where I know this is going to come up frequently, a few weeks in, I will have them generate some ideas for discussions and some I don't like to call them guidelines, but some tips and some hints. And they come up with great things that I typically add to a framework that I already have, like using I, or taking turns, or supporting people so they're not just hanging on their own. And so the one that we did this semester also is in that folder. And it's got great language that I got from Kriska and other people, and also from my students. And so my students get that, and I have started to come back to that later in the semester. Just let's pull them out again. Let's reread them. Where are we with them? And my students will just kind of, I don't call on them, they just kind of start reading them. And that is really helpful. We have shared vocabulary. We actually, I can make explicit conventions of language. Like, it's okay if we make mistakes about how we talk about different groups or how we talk about peoples and identities. That's part of why we're here. And then I give some examples as we go. And I feel like if I do that early, then when it comes up later, I could say, oh, remember we talked about this. And this is just part of an ongoing conversation that we have. I should say, I try to make the first couple of days really fun and not scary, because I want them to be there. The courses that I teach, almost all of them fill the race and ethnicity requirement, because it's an important commitment to me that we get lots of voices in the room. So there's a part of this early on that is meant to be reassuring, so that people don't drop the class, quite frankly. We also do a lot of reading across genres, a lot of bringing in lived experiences, a lot of examples from the beginning. Oh, did anybody see this TV commercial, and what did you see? And did anybody see that sign in the elevator? There was a sign for a while in Mason Hall that said, please give priority to people with disabilities, and it had a picture of crutches and a picture of a wheelchair. And we talk about how that's complicated, because on the one hand, it brings awareness. On the other hand, it renders increasingly invisible disabilities, right? And so acknowledging that these are complicated issues, and look, they're right here, and they're in our elevator, and are we thinking about them? What's happening? You know, when a student was talking about during rush, and as she was looking around, all of a sudden she was realizing there's nothing available for people with certain kinds of disabilities through rush. So we do a lot of that. I joke with them about wanting an outpost in their head. so that it just becomes, it starts to hopefully become a little bit habitual, and they're bringing in examples. And part of why that works, I like that, is because then when something happens, like Paula Deen, or something happens on campus, like a protest, or something happens like Ferguson, and I bring it in, it's normal. It's been normalized. It belongs here. I don't first have to make a case for why we're having this conversation. My students actually expect that we're going to have that conversation in class. Just from, like, you know, let's bring a song in, let's bring a, and then when it matters, it's the ground has been set. We also, we play and we push to excess. So in less tense moments, one of my students was teasing me about this. Somebody says, oh, that person's good looking, and I might say, by most normal standards in the dominant culture in the United States, and I play it up a little bit. I kind of ham it up, because then it becomes part of the conversation, and so when we do it in a tense moment, it's not new, and it's not in shame, it's in the inquiry that we have already established. We start slowly, which we've talked about a little bit. It's a big deal for me to see my students, so I learn names even in classes of 50. That's a strength of mine. Might not be one of yours, but I send emails. Like, if we have a good discussion early on, I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna send 10 emails out. Thanks for participating. And students typically are surprised, and it encourages increased participation. It takes time, but it's a small investment that pays off, those emails. I'll learn from them a lot. This semester we were talking around norms, around cisgender, and I was like, I'm not sure what the ism is yet. One of my students was like, cis sexism, and then she gave me all these examples, and I brought them in, and I named her with her permission. And so my students see me learning from them as well. So I have set a precedent where they are also, like, we learn from each other, that it's not just me at the front of the room. And then there are tense moments, right? I mean, I do all this work, and we do all this front loading, and we have these relationships, and it's wonderful, and then inevitably something happens. And so I wanted to share a couple of quick ideas, and I'm hoping to learn more from you, and we can talk more about them. One of them is that I have a cheat sheet. So I have like a 2-page thing that I've just pulled together that has all of my ideas that I might forget in the moment. And it's great. And there's things like sometimes just have students in the moment stop, write things down so you don't forget, so that they know we're going to come back to a conversation, and then let's pull out the discussion ideas, or let's figure out what's happening in the room, and then let's go back to the discussion. So, like, just stopping things in the moment. I also don't always stop to address things. Like, if I hear something that's like, oh, I can't believe that just got said, I keep an eye on the clock, so I make sure I leave myself time to address it, but I wait to see if somebody else will first, because a lot of my students are your students, and they are really smart about these issues, and it's great when they can come in. Sometimes if I feel like something feels kind of funky and I don't know what it is, I will actually just say that, and I have established a kind of precedent for that. So I might say, you know, something got said, and I can't quite figure out why it's just not sitting right with me. I'm going to give it some thought. You are welcome to kind of come back with me. Sometimes I'll name it, sometimes I won't. But I want you to know we'll come back to it next class, because that takes some of the heat off, and it also is a promise that it's not going to go unresolved, so things won't fester, and it's an invitation. I will use, there are also in the handout thing that you have, there's a list of handouts that I love, most of which came from CRLT. So Teresa was kind enough to find them. They have like collaborative questions and what to do in hot moments and how to set up guidelines for a class. And so they're all in this folder. Okay. And I'll throw one more thing out there. They have finally, I think it's called Seeds of Change, there are now official versions of the Peggy McIntosh Invisible Knapsack piece. There are, you know, thousands of those floating around. If you haven't seen them, take a look. If you have, it's a great reminder, and it's a great place to start. One of the things I like about them is she has appended like 20 ideas about using the invisible knapsack in the classroom. And some of them are great, some of them I'm less comfortable with, but I just continue to kind of every so often refresh my memory on those. I'll stop there. Thank you.